Good. Well, I think we'll get started. Thank you very much for choosing this particular breakout room. I'm very pleased that you've joined me today. Just in case you're wondering why somebody from Lincolnshire is poaching into your area, I was asked by John Henry to be able to give a presentation around some of the stuff that he and I are involved with up in Greater Lincolnshire, and I felt that there was some synergies with some of the things and all of the things that you've been talking about this morning. So without further ado, I just want to go to the particular aims of this presentation. Firstly, I'm going to forewarn you now, I'm not going to talk for the full 20 minutes. Hopefully I can go through this in enough detail for you to be able to formulate some questions in your own mind, and then we'll have a bit of more of a discussion session rather than it just being a chalk and talk exercise. But what I want to be able to do is talk about the Greater Lincolnshire context setting, summary of the journey so far, the learning points and delivery of the vision, and what's next. So my name's Andrew Brooks. I work for Lincolnshire County Council, but I'm also seconded out to the Greater Lincolnshire Local Enterprise Partnership as its energy lead. And partly what we've been looking at is developing the idea of how you support energy into the future, which supports growth, but also supports place locally. And as I go on to talk about, you'll see the synergies in terms of the place in Greater Lincolnshire being very similar to some of the places that you have in Cornwall. I know this slide is busy, so I'll just paraphrase it all. The Greater Lincolnshire LEP does have an ambition to look at whole system approaches, particularly around where we've got energy and water, because we have some significant issues around that, but also the fact that we have a dispersed economy. We have coastal areas, we have the issues of rural isolation, agriculture and agri-tech, and we also have this now inherited issue of a large industrial decarbonisation issue to deal with as well along the south bank of the Humber, all of which is against an area where there is poor local infrastructure to get utilities in place, and that does affect in the way in which people can deliver business, but also live in the area. So we've talked about the inheritance of a national significant industrial decarbonisation area in terms of the Humber estuary. We've also got energy capacity constraints that we're becoming more and more apparent as we go forward, particularly where we have issues around growth and also the effect that has on the existing populations. The importance of agri-food in the rural economy can't be underestimated, just in the same way that perhaps the refineries in the north of the area provide perhaps 20% of the fuel, keeping people going at the present time, which will decrease, hopefully. We also have 20% of the food security for the UK down in the south of the county, and that has massive implications in terms of a wider area than just Greater Lincolnshire. We also have the issues of an emerging local industry base, particularly around robotics, transport logistics. We now have a free port, and we're looking at tourism and flood risk assessments all the time in terms of our land makeup. And we also need to be able to show to government and to local regional funders the implications of why we need to be supported alongside competing against larger city and urban conurbations. So what are we trying to do? Well, we're definitely trying to develop a baseline to determine the long-term energy demand. We feel that having that robust evidence-based will help us when we start to talk about where we think energy will go into the future. We're looking at developing 5 area-wide energy plans, which should cement the sort of place-based aspect to what we're looking at, particularly linking in social inclusion, et cetera, to the determination of what we want to deliver into the future. It's building on local green capabilities within the private sector and looking at energy innovation in terms of a prime route to export. We do have sectoral areas which are well regarded both nationally and internationally, and we need to make sure that we can keep to the forefront of that when we're trying to deal with these things, alongside trying to deal with the issues of net zero and decarbonisation. Also looking at working with neighbouring LEPs in this area. We have at least 4 on our doorstep, which we engage with locally, because we recognise that energy and utilities don't respect government geographic boundaries, and we need to make sure that the solutions that we're trying to achieve don't cause unintended consequences for our neighbours. And I think finally, the most contentious issue is how far and how fast do we get to net zero in terms of delivering these things, and having a better opportunity to look at the way in which the local place can deliver that is a better solution than perhaps what we have now, where we can seem to have disparate climate emergency plans without much detail in terms of how that's going to be enacted. I won't dwell on this particular slide because these will be circulated afterwards, but there are some documentation in terms of what we've been getting up to within Greater Lincolnshire, which you can look at your leisure. In terms of learning points and delivery of vision, we are desperately trying to lead on cross-organisational support for these priorities, making sure that they're well understood, that there's a context behind them, that we can actually show due process in an incremental way, which means that people don't get scared before they've even started to go down this journey. Particularly taking leadership and commissioning and pump priming support to support these outlined LEP priorities. Definitely looking at the way in which to support clean growth around the SME route, the small and medium-sized enterprises. From a Lincolnshire perspective, we have 95% of our business being small SMEs and micro businesses, with very few large organisations in our patch. So we need to make sure that they're on board with this type of delivery mechanism. We need to be able to determine and agree a key set of performance metrics so that everybody's actually delivering aspects to the same standard, the same quality, and the same trajectory. And then ensuring that we have alignment with national and regional investment priorities. That might be taking charge of our own destiny and being able to articulate those in the first instance, so that what we're doing is not playing catch up, but actually supporting a lead and proactive role in terms of determining those. In terms of medium energy supply organisations, what we found doing our work is that we definitely need to improve energy IQ. What I mean by that is the ability of energy to be a great leveller in how we deliver both net zero decarbonisation, but also accessibility to energy in the future, particularly with that decentralisation agenda and balancing local grids. That's becoming more and more important. People shy away from things because they think it's a complex area, or they haven't had engagement in the first instance. Actually, the way in which we can improve their ability to engage with that will help in terms of the options that we have into the future. There is something about data modeling and how we get that data in the first place, and how effectively that can be shared without causing people problems. So we've been looking at the way in which open data operates within the energy field and coming up with some parameters so we can move forward when we start to look at that and look at data as the bedrock for how we deliver our future aspirations. Particularly looking at energy mix, as you might imagine, having a big decarbonisation area in this north of the Greater Lincolnshire area develops other opportunities, particularly around alternative fuels in respect to hydrogen, but also the opportunities of looking at carbon capture, which may be an interim measure that we need to consider as we're developing our new energy sources and supplies into the future. Something that we've been looking at as well is how do we develop energy markets? If we're developing production markets, where are we going to sell the product once we've done that? We're now looking at the Midlands Engine as part of that routeway, but we will also be looking to our other regional areas to see what we can do to help deliver that, because it will be a collegiate approach in terms of how we deliver net zero into the future. Regulation and governance can't be underestimated in terms of how quickly you can move forward on this. And I think everybody will find that they've got some bumps on their head around dealing with these sort of issues. And we need to get better at being able to be intelligent clients and be able to provide solutions where perhaps governance regulation doesn't always have the answers, particularly at a local level. So we're looking at that in terms of our enabling framework options that we've been developing over the last few years. Particularly important now will be the SME engagement in a clean growth agenda, but actually providing some leadership for SMEs around that clean growth agenda will be something the LET will have to take seriously over the next year or two in order to bring people up to speed. And then finally, I've heard mention of skills and training, et cetera. We need to understand what the low carbon sector economy will look like in the future. We know it won't follow the usual sector industry codes that we have at our disposal at the moment. We also know that we will have gaps in skills, and particularly moving people out of one industry into another where there's some synergy and some understanding and some level of transferable skills. We need to get better at actually developing those so that we can look at the future, look at how we can develop that low carbon sector economy, particularly where it has a relevance to the local place. In terms of what's next, there are an awful lot of agenda items that the LET will be looking at, but particularly important keywords here are whole system, industrial and rural energy decarbonisation. We'll be looking at framework structures that can support sectors and SMEs to engage in this approach. We're developing the leadership to look at investable propositions, particularly around SME support. We're looking to utilise Government and Midlands Engine to engage into their wider strategic priorities and green growth conversations. We're looking at engendering cross-organisational supports for local energy priorities. We're particularly interested, as you might well imagine, in terms of the decarbonisation roadmap for the Humber Estuary Industrial Cluster and Freeport proposals, and then really motoring on with our delivery of local area energy plans. I've cantered through that particular presentation because I feel that there will probably be lots of questions that hopefully you'll be able to throw back at me. But also in the absence of that, I can at least talk about the genesis of how we've got to this place, what we're using to underpin it, and then how we're engaging with lots of different people to help us in this journey. So without further ado, I've put in my LinkedIn profile. That's because after 21 years at the Lincoln County Council, I'm leaving on Thursday. So this will be one of my swan songs. But if people want to contact me individually, they can do that through their LinkedIn address. If they try and talk to anybody else in the county council, I think they might look a bit bemused. But more importantly, the one that I would urge you to have a look at is the Greater Lincolnshire website, particularly the ones around energy and low carbon development, because I think there'll be opportunities to see whether there's any synergies between Cornwall and Lincolnshire, which I imagine there will be, but also what we're doing in other areas to help support this agenda. So I'd like to throw it out in terms of any other questions. If not, then I'm trained to operate in a vacuum and can talk for the full 20 minutes if people actually want that. But I think I would rather be able to have a discussion with you in the remaining time that we have. Open to the floor. Please utilise what methodology you want, either a physical hand or just come off mute and hopefully you'll be able to be heard. Any questions whatsoever before I have to fill in the void? Apparently the breakout rooms go back to the main room if there's a silence of more than 30 seconds, so I better actually fulfill that. So we talked about the journey that we've been on. I think it's quite important that if you think about 5 years, we were nowhere in terms of understanding our energy requirements and what we might need into the future, and certainly not well versed in terms of how we might do that within a net zero decarbonisation agenda. I think more recently, government policy has started to get to people to thinking about it more seriously. But we've gone through a process where we've actually looked at things from a commercial point of view in the first place from the Greater Lincolnshire LEP, which was a report that we did in terms of utility constraints and how they might affect growth, which gave us a number of different answers, but obviously provided more questions than answers in terms of the future of energy. So we've spent the remaining time looking at how we develop that, understanding the future of energy, how we can be more locally responsible for generating in a responsible manner energy requirements, but also how we might utilize the resources and the infrastructure that's already there to make best use of it. We've developed an energy strategy through BEIS funding, which has allowed the LEP to be able to understand where energy features within the environment. And what I've been trying to do is demystify some of the issues around energy, particularly from people who feel it's more complex than they might want to deal with, but also because they can't see it sometimes, they just take it for granted. And what I've been trying to say is that if you get primary infrastructure right, the secondary infrastructure that you're actually interested in, which is the business parks, the industrial estates, the housing estates, all of the things that you see and do all the time, will come more effectively because you provided the wherewithal for them to do it in the first place and make some choices themselves. We've also been very well engaged with our distribution network operators from a electricity, gas, water, and telecommunications perspective. And I've been at pains to talk to them about the fact that they are economic anchors in our local area, and we need to work alongside them in that regard, rather than it seemingly just something that we might engage with from a local plan perspective, or that we actually don't have much engagement with them at all until it's, sorry, I'm just looking at the chat now. Sorry, I've been able to pull that up. I apologize. Right, let me just answer this question from Ben Simpson. This is like a chat show, isn't it? This is very good. Andrew, how are you funding your local area energy planning work, and have you procured suppliers? Well, interestingly enough, at the moment, we've just secured funding. We've secured funding from the LEP board directly to do some work on a local area plan, energy plan, for the agri-food sector. So we've moved it away from a place-based approach to look at a sectoral approach, particularly because of the aspirations of creating a food valley down in the south of our area. So that has some money from the LEP. It also has match funding from Lincoln University, and that work will be ongoing very soon, but unfortunately not with me. At the present time, I'm just going through a commissioning process that I'm having to try and finish before I leave, which is looking at how the local authority at One Public Estate and LEP infrastructure group can actually ask some of these thorny energy questions. They've already contributed themselves to that particular initial piece of work. Hopefully then money can be found for the more, the bigger, wider area local energy plans that we've been trying to deliver because of the evidence requirements. I think it's probably the wrong way round, but actually the way in which they've done it gives people in a senior position more confidence that they can go back to their senior politicians and policymakers to be able to make the argument and then build up the evidence base behind it. Does that answer your question, Ben? You can just a nod and a wave or just say yes.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Is there any more information that you require, Ben?
Just get myself off mute. Yeah, I mean, I can drop you my email, and if you've got any, I mean, it's interesting to the sectoral approach. I think we are looking in Cornwall. I work for Cornwall Council on energy and climate change, so we are looking at some ERDF funding for a more traditional area-based local area planning context. But we've obviously got quite a lot of activity going on in down the sectoral streams, particularly in the agricultural sector. So I think it'd be interesting to see what you're doing there.
That would be brilliant. And I think one of the things that I haven't talked about, because not everybody's interested in agriculture, is this issue around the fact that Lincoln University have got an international reputation around AI and robotics, which obviously has a very heavy digital and energy requirements, and we need to make sure that that can be carried on into the future, and they need to think about that. So that's why we're looking at a sectoral approach as well as a separate place-based approach. Thanks, Mark, for your comments and encouragement. Leslie Ibbotson, I'm looking at very early stages of a place-based energy project. Where would I start? I think from my perspective, I know how you feel, because when I first started this process about 4 years ago, I didn't know either. It would be interesting to look at the way in which the place is being managed, and what I mean that in terms of local authority engagement, but also distribution network operators do have an awful lot of local energy data that you can start to mine if you've got access to their websites. I know that Cornwall have Western Power Distribution as their electricity DNO, so you're at one end of the extreme, we're at the other in terms of their contract package area. And they've been doing an awful lot of work to open up their energy data. It'd be interesting to see if the local authority have any options in terms of how they might engage with the climate change approach. That might be a good way to start. Community Energy England is another one where you might be able to engage with them, and they do support community projects to come forward and are interested all the time in terms of how that might work. I would imagine that you might want to look at local HE institutes as well. They might have some studies going on that they may be able to utilize your area with, and you provide that local place-based engagement strategy for them, and they may give you some data from it. Hopefully that answers your question, Leslie. I know that we haven't got much time now, so unless there's a
Great, thank you.
Brilliant. Is there any quick questions? Well, can I thank you for your time and your patience? It's been an interesting process, and I think it's gone very well. Thank you for your questions and not leaving me hanging, and hopefully you'll enjoy the rest of the conference.